You are on the next level. This is The Beautiful Truth, where the expression is still free.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
And you are very welcome. This is The Beautiful Truth with Fintan Dunne reporting your no bullshit coronavirus report for the 15th of March 2020 at noon Eastern. Folks, this is turning into a political football, and already the issue of shutdowns and when you do them has become a political football. It's sharply divergent views between the United Kingdom and much of the rest of the EU, where we've seen this issue come to light first. And in the United Kingdom, the newly elected Prime Minister, instead of bringing forward his chief medical advisor as the premier spokesperson on this issue, brought forward instead his chief scientific advisor. That's a distinction which is very politically significant, because Boris Johnson thinks that the pharmaceutical industry is having far too much say in all this stuff and that some common sense needs to apply, and he thinks he's got just the person to apply that common sense. You know, I think he might be right. The guy's name is Sir Patrick Vallance. Let's have a listen to what he said when he was introduced by the Prime Minister following their announcement of UK government action in recent days.
This is the shape of an epidemic. So you go along the bottom for some time with not very much happening. And that's probably where we are now. There are currently 590 cases that have been identified in the UK, and there are more than 20 patients on intensive care units. If you calculate what that really means in terms of the total number, it's much more likely that we've got somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people infected at the moment. That's still a relatively small number. We're still on the flat part. As these curves start to take off, as more people get it, they take off quite steeply. And that's why timing is so important. Because what you want to do is to protect people during the most infectious period. So we're trying to reduce the number of cases at any one time. That's very important for NHS in order to make the NHS able to cope with this. And it's also important because it pushes it out into summer months. So that's one aim, is to change the shape of this. And it's important to recognise it's not to stop everybody getting it. You can't do that. It's not possible to stop everybody getting it. And it's also actually not desirable because you want some immunity in the population. We need to have immunity to protect ourselves from this in the future.
There you go. That's the key point there, isn't it? He's saying that there is such a thing, believe it or not, as herd immunity. That human beings have a capacity to resist a viral infection individually and collectively. Who'd have thunk? I thought that you had to sit around like an idiot waiting for the pharmaceutical industry to show up with either a treatment or a vaccine. I thought you were otherwise completely powerless and helpless. In fact, that's pretty much the impression that the Irish Prime Minister gave when, instead of reassuring the people as he cancelled St. Patrick's Day and shut down the nation's schools, he told them that there was no vaccine, no immunity and no treatments, all of which are dubious claims. So this has become a political football. This is already a political football, and these issues of when you go and when you close down are becoming vital. Let's hear some more from Sir Patrick Vallance, because I think he's got it right.
The second big aim that we need to look for is how in that we protect the vulnerable and the elderly, who are at most risk of serious illness and dying from this. So during the period of peak transmission, we need to protect them at that phase. And if you look at the curves, it becomes obvious that if you do that at the moment, you're not protecting anybody really, because the number of cases are too small. If you do it at the right time, then you're protecting them over the peak, and you're not asking them to be in isolation for too long. At the moment, if you asked households to completely isolate if one person was ill, most people would not have coronavirus. You may have to do the whole thing all over again. And what happens then is the effect of that wanes, because people get fed up with doing this and you end up with not being able to do it time and time again. So the timing is critical, and that's true across all of the interventions we've looked at. That's why this is a package of things that need to happen at the right time and in the right phasing. In terms of mass gatherings and schools, Schools, it's true that there's some effect in closing schools, but that effect is minimal, and actually you'd have to do it for 13 to 16 weeks or longer, and you don't need to be a very advanced mathematician to work out that the chances of keeping children not speaking to each other or playing with each other over 13 to 16 weeks is zero. So the idea is to do things at the right time, not to end up with measures stopping during the peak and exposing more people to illness.
Isn't that sound? Isn't that common sense? And isn't that view going to be ridiculed by the pharmaceutical industry hystericists who are in control of your mainstream media in most countries? So bear in mind, this is the alternative approach and something which I think we should follow. The reason, again, to emphasize why this early shutdown issue is so important is if we go too early, we do a whole heap of economic damage, and actually we may be counterproductive in the long term. The reason is that when people go into lockdown, it's all with great hopes, aspirations, and vision for how that's going to be done. But after a week or two, it starts to become a bit more difficult to hold the lockdown in place because of sheer economic reasons, because of practical things that you just have to do. So it breaks down. Despite everybody's best efforts, it breaks down because you can't just shut an economy down. And from a cost-benefit point of view, you might even be doing yourself more damage in terms of deaths and morbidity losses over time than had you followed a less hysterical approach. For example, had we followed an approach where we asked older people to sequester, and that was the key metric we were using to reduce their potential exposure, rather than asking everybody else to shut down. And also, we don't want to shut it down. At least not if you're a pharmaceutical industry critic like I am. You don't want to shut it down because we have got natural capacities. Let's move on anyway from that to some of the other issues in terms of what's happening right now. We take a look at the coronavirus situation right now. It looks, as ever, the figures can be frightening and always look frightening. In fact, they're not as frightening as they seem. Let's go down and get some detail on this. Take a look at the number of total cases there. This is now just to give you a non-hysterical take on all this. Number of total cases. But watch now as I change from a linear view of that, where every line is 0, 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000, right? To logarithmic, where I'm looking at the rate of increase. Oh, the rate of increase was steep initially, and then it began to level off, and then it leveled off quite well before kicking up slightly recently, which is probably due to the Italy effect. Moving on then, similarly to total deaths. Again, the linear figure looks scary as we move towards 6,000 deaths, but let's look at the rate of change on that. Again, you see the same thing. The rate of change is leveling off with that little kick there recently from what happened in Italy. So, in terms of what's going to happen, remember the graph I did 2 videos back, and you can get these on my channel. Subscribe and click that bell button, by the way, if you want notifications on these videos. And I showed you how the vast majority of cases in the world of pneumonia are in over 70s and under 5s and are not caused by respiratory illnesses. In fact, they're caused by, in the case of 70-year-olds, they're caused by pollution. And in the case of infants, they're caused by malnutrition. So, your chances and your risk is down in these blue and red bars on the chart there if you're under the age of 50, and it's a very low risk. Looking then to try and figure out what's going on, and for example, place what's happened in Italy recently into some kind of perspective, let's look at the global stats on influenza and pneumonia by country. And you can see the ones in red are the ones with the highest rates, those in purple are intermediate, and those in grey have the lowest rates, which is China, Europe, and most of the United States and Australia. So when we look at the rates per 100,000, in other words, how many people per 100,000 die in any country, you can see Sierra Leone there, 234.45 is the number 1 place. And to get Italy, we've to come all the way down the second column there. Italy is so far down the mortality rate on this, it's unreal. It's almost near the end. So Italy has a very low rate, as have many developed countries, in the order of 8, 9, 10. There's Spain with 10.21. right? Belarus 5, Australia 4.27. Terrific. Finland 2.91. What an achievement. So there's some difference, as you can see there. So that's death rate from flu and pneumonia per 100,000 of the population. So if Italy has 8.15, then we're talking around about 80 people per million. If it's 8.15 per 100,000, it's 80 people per million. Lombardy, where the epidemic is centered in Italy, right? There's the epidemic in Italy. There's the bar for Lombardy. It has 744 deaths. So the majority are in Lombardy. It has a population, Lombardy, of 10 million. So what I'm saying there is that in an average flu pneumonia season, you could expect something in the region of 800 or so deaths in a bad flu season in Italy. And so far, they've had something around that number from this. And of course, it hasn't stopped. It continues on. There's a chart of the global situation now. Again, this is to give you a non-historical view on all this. Those are the countries, but let's just organize that chart by total cases per million of the population. I'll click it a second time so we bring the highest number of total cases per million of the population up to the top of the graph. And now let's have a look. So now we see the red there, the new deaths. 250 new deaths in Italy versus 5 in South Korea, 2 in Switzerland, 36 and 85 in Spain and Iran. So, you know, this isn't going at lightning speed anywhere all of a sudden. Let's take a look, for example, at the cases in Iran. 12,000 altogether, and 611 deaths, 5,000 or 4,500 recovered. Let's come down again, look at the logarithmic scale to see the rate of increase. It's slowing. Look at the daily new cases, not too bad. It'll be episodic and there's the number of active cases they currently have in Iran. So to give you a bit of context then on all of this, look at this figure here. Almost 90% of global coronavirus cases are actually in 4 countries. Those countries, China, far exceeding anybody else in terms of their experience. And yet look at their graph, even on a linear scale, so that you're not specifically looking at rate of change. You can see how that's absolutely leveled off and how the deaths in Italy, Iran and South Korea, while they are concerning, are nowhere near in scale to what China's been through and succeeded in. Not just because of social distancing. The main reason that China had such a huge reaction to everything that went on was that they got it so badly wrong initially and let the thing get out of control, as seemed to have happened in Italy. So it wasn't so much that their subsequent draconian measures stopped this epidemic as that their failure to apply any measures of social restriction in order to slow down the virus had such a devastating effect. I've seen calculations that show that that figure of 80,000 cases would have been more like 8,000 or less, perhaps even as low as 5,000, had they done the right thing at the right time. So those are the critical reasons why you have to do everything right. Look at their death rate and their recovery rate. This is from worldometers.info, and you can see in green there the recovery rate in China increasing and increasing, and as the epidemic moved on, you can see their death rate falling. Now, Italy would wish that it was anywhere like that. Italy's cases and recoverers, it's a substantially different figure. They clearly have got their mortality through the roof and their recoveries are not matching that. That is a potential concern, folks, what's going on in Italy there, because the other research that I've been doing indicates that this virus is replicating with mutation. It's so far replicating with mutation inside individuals rather than doing so between persons and spreading new varieties between persons. But some of the initial research does seem to confirm that what they have done is taken a look at the lungs of infected individuals and compared those with the lungs of people who get flu, influenza and other normal diseases, etc., both inside and outside China. And they're finding that the virus is replicating and mutating, trying to find a way around your individual immune system, if you are infected with it. And so it is that high replication rate with mutation that it's generating a lot of different attack vectors, and your body having to keep up with that produces something called a cascade of immune response, which can simply overwhelm your body. But that is in a minority of individuals. For the vast majority of individuals, this is, and I expect the global stats in the end to be nothing much worse than a bad flu season, except arriving in the spring and summer months. And the more we could spread that out, then the lower our risks are. But the primary thing that we're suffering from here is from a lack of ventilators, not anything else. This, if it wasn't for the fact that a minority of those who catch it have an immune cascade response, would be very handleable. But that immune cascade can produce a pneumonia, and that pneumonia needs ventilation in order to increase the recovery rate. That's really the problem we have. We have not got a problem, repeat folks, not got a problem with a voracious, vicious virus which is slaying people left, right and centre. No, we have a relatively benign problem which in a small number of individuals produces an immune reaction that actually requires ventilation, and we just don't have the ventilators. I mean, number of ventilation beds is something that we calculate on the basis of expediency, and there's no point in having empty ones that you don't need. So that's the only problem we have, is this immunological response in a small fraction of individuals and a lack of ventilators. Don't get scared by the stories going around about this virus. However, having said that, the death rate in Italy is a little bit concerning, and there is a possibility that this virus could mutate between individuals and spread newer variants. I'll do a special show on that, and you can get that on my channel. I'll also do one on treatments also. So again, hit that subscribe and ring the bell to get notified of those videos. I'll leave you with one sobering statistic, which takes a look at the United States and the flu epidemic, which takes place seasonally in the United States, and latest data from the CDC there. Because figures are going to get thrown around, and there are going to be people trying to scare you with the total number of fatalities which we could have as a result of this, right? So there's CDC estimates of flu illnesses, which actually only 1 in 6 things that look like flu and have symptoms that seem to be flu that you get in the winter are flu. Did you know that? I didn't know that either. Amazing what this epidemic is teaching us. But in fact, that's the case. Only a fraction of those who think they have flu have flu. Many of the rest of them have respiratory syncytial virus, they have parainfluenza, they have other coronaviruses, there's all sorts of stuff out there. It's all labelled and bundled in under the name flu because it's too complicated to explain that in detail. Also because if you knew that only 1 in 6 things you can catch in the winter were flu, you mightn't bother to buy a flu vaccine, figuring, hey, if I've only a 1 in 6 chance of getting the flu anyway, what's the point? Good point. Pharmaceutical industry doesn't want you to know that. So, this is all of those respiratory illnesses, including coronaviruses, in a typical year, the kind of mortality and illness figures. And there are, as a result of those normal seasonal winter outbreaks, something between 10 and 45 million illnesses. It's quite a vague figure, isn't it? But that's the best guess they can get on it at the moment. That shows you the difficulty of estimating how many people have a disease out in the general community, because in hospitals, you only get to see the really sick ones. Then, when you do get to see them, there's less than 800,000 at maximum, and probably more like 500,000 hospitalizations in an average year for the flu in the United States. And then finally, the death figure lower again at around about, perhaps at most 50,000 deaths, which are attributable to flu pneumonia and the other viruses in a typical season. So if you get people throwing around figures like we're going to have 60,000 people die in the United States as a result of this if we're not careful, well then that is about what you would expect were you to get a bad flu season which arrived in the spring and summer, as this one here is doing. So that's not a cause for national hysteria, but certainly is a cause for making sure that we smooth the graph out, because we just don't have the ventilators to go around. That's the big threat, folks. Okay, So that's shutdown timing and infectivity and mortality. I'd like to do 2 more videos, one on treatments for the general public and one on the 2 strains, which will be a fairly technical one. If you'd like to get notified, again, I keep banging on about it, but I really don't have time to send out emails and stuff, so the best way to make sure you don't miss these updates is to subscribe and ring the bell. That way you'll get an incoming notification. Okay, that's it for this edition of The Beautiful Truth. I will be back very shortly with more, and I do hope you can join me for that. But in the meantime, for breakfornews.com, this has been Fintan Dunne reporting.